so much for joining. It's a delight to be able to learn with you all today on a very important topic, Yalta and the place of anger in leadership, which is not only fun just to learn Torah together, but also to think about rising anger in the world and certainly in American society, and to some degree in the Jewish culture today. Given the amount of tensions and anxiety, anger is obviously associated with some of those stresses, and for each of us personally to think about our own anger control, and to the extent that we are in leadership, to think about how that plays out. And we're here with a great scholar, Rabba Sara Hurwitz, who is the co-founder and president of Yeshivat Maharat, the first institution to ordain Orthodox women as clergy. He also serves on the rabbinic staff at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, a great shul, a great synagogue in the Bronx of New York, if you're ever out that way and want to visit. And there's a lot to say about her, but just a great teacher and organizational builder and partner and friend of ours. And we're thrilled to have the opportunity to learn with her today. Rabba Sara, welcome.
Thanks, really. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me here. And it's nice to know that I can teach from Riverdale, New York, even though people are all over the place. And some may even be 3 hours behind. I know this is being recorded, so hello to everybody who I don't see on the screen. And for those of you who are joining live, I feel free to turn your screen on. I am hoping to throw out some questions and have some participation. If you're comfortable with that, would love your participation. And with that, I wanted to share the source sheet in the chat. So just let me know if you're able to open it. If you're not able to open it and you're having trouble, I will share screen. But I can also, if you're able to look at it without me sharing screen, sometimes that also works well. So just let me know if this doesn't work. Otherwise, I will keep going. Okay, so thanks, Sherry. So as Rav Shmuley said, the world is harsh these days. And just even thinking about my own story of a journey towards becoming a female Orthodox rabbi, there was many moments where I felt frustrated and angry about the rate of change or about how fast or slow others were moving. And at the same time, I was often rewarded and encouraged to keep moving forward with a big smile on my face. And I was often told, the reason why you're so successful in becoming the first the first female Orthodox rabbi is because you have a nice disposition and you don't come off looking or seeming like an angry feminist. And it is true that I try to sort of walk in this world with a lot of dignity, but I think that I wonder about the place of anger and actually the positive aspects of anger, even in a world where women are told that we should not be angry. And so with that introduction in mind, I wanted to introduce us to Yalta. So Yalta is one of my favorite characters, one of my favorite people that we encounter in the Gemara, not only because she's one of the very few females who are named in the Gemara, but she has an active voice and appears in about 8 places through several stories. I want to tell you, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the other stories that she appears after we read this one sort of primary story that we're going to spend some time on. But just by way of introduction, Yalta lives in the 3rd century. She's married to Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman was handpicked for her because she was the daughter of the exilarch, meaning she was the daughter of the leadership of the town, which meant that she has stature and she was probably even wealthy. And he was picked given, with the thinking that he was an appropriate scholar for her. And in many of the stories that we encounter, she could be seen either as a wonderful advocate or an agitator. So with that in mind, let's dive into this first story. This story, just to give you some context, appears in a discussion about benching, grace after meals. So generally, when one benches and there's a community of people around, you're supposed to do it, or you're supposed to lead the benching over a cup of wine, a kos shel yayin. And that wine is a blessing is said afterwards, and then everyone at the table participates from the drinking of that wine. So in the midst of this very sort of technical conversation about how this works, I want to hear more about why you want to be like her when you grow up. So hold that, but I want to hear about what you mean by that. But so in the context of this conversation about the use of this cup of wine, we have the story. So we're going to dive in, we're going to read the story, and then we're going to analyze it together and try to break it down and give it a little bit of context, okay? So we begin, Ula ikla lebe Rav Nachman. So Ula was once in the house of Rav Nachman. So the assumption here, just to give you a little bit more detail, is that Ula is a guest, which it says explicitly, and most likely traveled a long distance all the way from Jerusalem to Babylonia. So he is from a different part of the country, from the world, and traveled a long way to be at the table of Rabbi Nachman and Yalta. Whenever you read any text, be it from Tanakh or from the Gemara, I always like to encourage people just to close your eyes and picture the scene. Like, what is happening as we're reading these words? Like, let's try bring it to life. So Ula is sitting at the house. Maybe they're sitting at a long table. Maybe Yalta's on one end of the table. Maybe Ula and Rav Nachman on the other end of the table. And they had a meal. They sat together. They ate. They broke bread together. Barich brachta mezuna, and they said grace. And then Rabbi Nachman, the host, passed the cup of benediction. Ula, who was leading grace after meals, passed the cup of benediction to Rav Nachman, as if to indicate, I have said the blessing, and now I'm passing it to you. This whole ritual is done. Amar le Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman turns to his guest and says, L'shata Amar kasad brachtala Yalta. Do me a favor, send over the cup of benediction to my wife, to Yalta. Amar le. So instead of just acquiescing and doing as he was told, Ula instead gives like a Devar Torah. He starts waxing poetic, quoting psukim. He says, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Wasn't it that Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein pri bitna shel isha miparech ela mipri bitno shel ish shenama overech pri bitna lo ne'amar ela pri bitnacha. Tanya nami hachi Rabbi Natan Omer minan she'ein pri bitna shel isha miparech ela mipri bitna shel ish Shenamar obarech pri bitna lo nemar ela pri bitnacha. Okay, so here's the Devar Torah that he essentially gave. Hold on a second. The Torah says, based on verses in Devarim, the fruit of a woman's body is blessed only from the fruit of a woman's body. Since it says he will also bless the fruit of his body, it does not say the fruit of her body, but the fruit of his body. It has been taught similarly. When do we know that the fruit of a woman's body is only blessed from the fruit of a man's body? Because it says he will also bless the fruit of his body. It does not say the fruit of her body, but the fruit of his body. So we're going to break down in a few minutes what this Devar Torah is actually about. But you can sort of imagine that, instead of passing this cup and doing the nice thing that their hosts required of him, he starts waxing about this Devar Torah, and then Yalta, perhaps on the other side of the table, hears this discussion, and the Gemara continues and says, Ad hachi shma Yalta, kama bizhira. Yalta overhears, and she gets up in a passion. Va'alat le Va'alat leve chamra, v'tavara arba mea dene de chamra. And she gets up and goes to the cellar, maybe in the basement, maybe in the attic, but it seems like it was somewhere within their home. And she breaks 400 barrels of wine. Amar le Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman now turns to Ula, their guest, and says, Shadar la mar kasa Harina. Now, can you please send this cup to her? Shlach la, so he sends it, but he sends it with a message. Kol ha navga debrichtahi. Everything, all that spilt wine, all the cups that you use could have been for a blessing, could have been used for the benediction. Shlach le, and she sent back the following phrase: gossip comes from peddlers and vermin from rags. Okay, so that is our primary story that we're gonna work with. So if we are wearing, so if we were to be Ula for one moment, if we were to put on our Ula hats back in the 3rd century and imagine that we were a guest in somebody's home and we acted the way the story says that we acted, right? Refusing to send this cup of benediction. What is going through our mind? Why did Ula act the way he acted? This is a moment, if you feel comfortable, to maybe come off and react. Otherwise, I'll keep moving us forward. Why did Ula, if we were Ulas in the 3rd century, why did Ula react the way he reacted?
He wasn't used to women being treated with respect.
Absolutely. So let's say right away, Ula wasn't used to. Now let's pick that apart a little bit. Maybe he wasn't used to it because he came from a different place, right? In the minhag, the tradition in Bavel, in Babylonia, was to treat women with greater respect. But in Palestine, where he was from, women just didn't, participate in these rituals. Or maybe no matter where they were, no matter where he was in the world, just in general, women didn't command this kind of respect. And maybe in the home of Nachman and Yalta, there was an exception to the rule, but women just weren't treated equally in that way with respect.
Okay, so this is all something that's always gotten me about this story, okay? All right, you go into someone else's home and you start judging what goes on in that home in the first place. Okay, now just the historian in me is kind of thinking, okay, first of all, the rules of hospitality at that time, okay, this is very bad form on his part. Okay, I'm just going to say it, put it out there. Now, I mean, I could go on and on and on forever about all of the screwball things in this story, though, but it is I have to point out, one, it is very bad form for him to go in because he is criticizing the master of the house as a husband and as the one who's supposed to be head of the household and everything, which is actually not good form at all, considering the fact that he is in his house. So
it's a terrible guess. We did not want
he's a horrible guess. Yes.
I agree. We did not want Ula in his home. And more than that, what is Ula actually saying? Now let's begin to pick apart these words of Torah that he's saying, right? He's talking about fruits and he's talking about vines and her body and his body. What is he trying to convey in this message?
Okay, he's criticizing this man as a husband also, which is actually pretty ridiculous because that's actually a veiled slam at him as a husband. So yeah.
What's the slam? What's he saying?
Okay, so it's about all right, hold on, I need to pull up the exact words though, but it's about women, his version, his role, and then women are blessed through men and everything. So there are lots of implications there about, well, what are the roles, for the husband?
Absolutely. And so let's go there, right? It's talking about the roles of women. Judy, go for it.
She only has value by virtue of his participation in her reproductive life.
Absolutely. It's for sure about reproduction and seeds and right. And essentially what he's saying is that her worth is only through him. And what is she? She's merely a vessel, a container to hold his seed. And, they must have skipped the science journal that came out that month in their home, but they didn't get the memo that children, that procreation occurs, and both male and female are necessary for the process of procreation, eggs and sperm. And his sort of mistaken science is that women are merely there to contain the seed. Okay, so this is where Ula is coming from. We've established that he's not such a good guest. We've established that he is has a little respect probably for his host Nachman, and that he is undermining him by discussing his and his wife's relationship. And we for sure noted that Ula is trying to not only disrespect Yalta, but make a statement about women in general and the worth of women in general, which is that they have none, that their worth is only in relation to men. Okay, so now let's put our Yalta hats on, right? So Yalta gets up in a rage and she breaks 400 barrels. Now, I don't know if she actually went and broke 400 barrels, but there is certainly a metaphor that's being conducted here. And if she did actually break 400 barrels of wine, that takes a lot of energy and effort, right? Like, you don't just do that by the way.
That's a few college tuitions of money down the drain also. Okay, wine's not cheap. So, right. Yeah.
So on one hand, let's be a little critical of Yalta, right? Like, a little disappointed about her reaction. She could have and should have been a little bit more dignified. I kind of wish she used her words, right? If she was supposed to, if Ula was giving her a words of Torah, maybe she should have responded back. Maybe she should have engaged in conversation with him, used her language. But instead, she got up in this rage and reacted and acted. And in this way, she's sort of fulfilling the prophecy or the assumption of who women are. Biblically counting, 400 equals a large number. I think that is true, Judy. And there's other ways you can read it. It could be the number of Mishnayot in it could be like a biblical, a Talmudic reference, but I think that it's true that it's a large number, taking a lot of energy. It takes a lot of insight and foresight and thought to get up and do that. It's not something that just happens in a minute. Yalta is at this moment this quintessential caricature even of who women are thought to be and seen as in this time period, right? So don't kill the messenger, but this is a literary tool that many people asserted onto women, right? And Gila Fine in her new book called in her new book The Bad Woman in the Rabbi's Attic, Rereading the Women in the Talmud, a really interesting read, notes that Yalta is the quintessential shrew, right? So she compares this story to other literature, including The Taming of the Shrew, and helps us understand that throughout time, women are sort of put on this other pedestal as being irrational or a shrew. So let's read source number 2, just so that we are on the same page. So she's trying to understand this insult, and we're going to pick apart the insult a little bit together. But her first assessment and analysis is gossip comes from peddlers and lice from rags. Yalta snaps back incensed, infuriated by this rabbinic messenger and his Israelite ways, right? Like we had talked about how he was a guest from a different place. She responds by throwing Ula's gesture, together with as many insults as she possibly can, back in his face. You, Ula, are nothing but a gossiping, rag-wearing, lice-infested peddler. Thus far, the story of Yalta. At first reading, we seem to have before us a classic shrew tale. We have the comedic undertones, the violence, both verbal and physical, the pitiable and placating husband, and most importantly, the bad-tempered madwoman who feels herself scorned and unleashes her fury at everyone and everything in her path. But is this the story the Talmud is telling? And then she goes on and says, a similar point is made by Susie Kaplow in a 1973 essay, Getting Angry, which discusses the fraught relationship between women and anger. When men get angry, claims Kaplow, they are indignant. When women get angry, they are irrational. This, too, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Dismiss a woman as irrational, ill-tempered, and shrewish, and she will become irrational, ill-tempered, and shrewish. At this moment, at first blush, right, it seems like she is fulfilling every concept of what a shrew is. But if we start adding some context to who Yalta is and start looking at some of the other stories, we get a more robust picture of who this woman is. So I said she appears in about 8 stories in the Talmud. And in each phase, she's seen as somebody who is a scholar. In one story, the question is about whether a person could be carried from one end of a room to another end of the room, even if you're not allowed to carry, let's say if it's over Shabbat. And the example given is Yalta. Could she be carried from one end of the room to another end of the room? And it after some back and forth, the decision is that if the person being carried has something that the people need, they have some scholarship, they have some area of expertise, there's something that the people need, and they're seen as somebody that you need to give kavod to, some respect to, then they could be lifted up and carried from one place to another place. So it cannot be ignored that Yalta is sort of the example of somebody who should be respected and has some knowledge. In another story, she is having a chavrusa, she's learning with her husband, and they're having a conversation about what to do with an udder, with an udder from a cow. And the reason why udder is kind of confusing because it's meat, it's milk packaged in meat, right? If you had to take that udder, udder, and roast it and cook it in some way, what would its status be? Is it kosher? Is it not kosher? Are you allowed to eat it? You're not allowed to eat it. So it's an interesting question. And it's really Yalta who defines and comes up with the right answer at that moment. And then there's this story that I wanted to share with you a little bit more deeply. So the story is, I'm going to actually say it outside, but you can look at it inside. So the story takes place inside the Beit Midrash. So we can't help but note that Yalta is inside the walls of the learning center where usually only men are. And she enters the Beit Midrash and she has a question about her underwear, about her cloth, about what her status is based on bodily secretions that come out of her fluids that come out of her body. And she's trying to figure out whether she can reunite with her husband, go to the mikveh, and have sex with her husband again. So this was done at this time, and she brought her cloth to one rabbi, to Rabbi Barchana, and he looks at it and he said, nope, no good. You can't go to the mikveh. And then the Talmud continues and says she took that same cloth and took it to another rabbi, Rabbi Judah, who said it was clean. He said it was fine, and she could reunite with her husband. So the Talmud, one would expect, should criticize Yalta for shopping for the right answer, right? Like, how could Yalta go from one rabbi to another rabbi? But instead, the Talmud criticizes Rabbi number 2. How, Rabbi number 2, could you overturn your colleague's answer? You knew his answer. He was sitting right there, and yet you said you disagreed with him explicitly, and you overturned his answer from being tameh to tahor, from being not okay to saying that it was okay. And then the Gemara goes on to explain, well, the reason why that happened is because Yalta was an expert. She was an expert in her own body. She was an expert in these laws, and she actually knew the answer. And when the first rabbi gave her the answer, it was the wrong answer. She knew it was wrong. And she and maybe the Gemara said there was a pain in his eye. There was something wrong with him that day. He didn't rule correctly. And rather than embarrass him, she went to go seek out the right answer from somebody else who heard her out. It seems like they had a back and forth exchange. And she convinced him, she advocated for herself, she convinced him to change his answer. And from this ruling, actually, we are told that women can we can believe women to determine the status of their own bodies. So actually, live halacha, Jewish law, was extracted from this story and from Yalta. So she's painted here as somebody who is an expert about this particular set of laws, somebody who can engage with other rabbis, who was politically savvy, perhaps even, who established the law for, thousands of years to come, and also was willing to work within a system. She didn't have to ask this question to anybody, but she bought her cloth inside the Beit Midrash and engaged in a process, engaged in conversation with the rabbis in order to get the answer that she knew she needed. So is this the same woman who got up in a huff and got up, angrily and broke 400 barrels of wine? There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. But perhaps taking the stories together, one can begin to again, like, pick apart what was really happening. Maybe Yalta, up until this point, had been in conversation with people at her table over and over again, trying to advocate for herself that she deserves to be part of this ritual event, that the Ulas of the world are just guests, and that she and Rabbi Nachman have certain traditions in their home and people should respect it, that she has every right to be sitting at the table and an equal participant in the conversation and the ritual at hand. And maybe Ula was just the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Like, it was just this moment where she couldn't talk anymore. She had talked and talked and talked, and suddenly action was needed. I can't help but think about the Broadway show Suffs. I don't know if any of you have heard of it yet or seen it, but it's sort of a new Broadway show. It's been called like the feminist Hamilton, right? It's the story of the suffragist movement, and there's so many themes that are wonderful. But I'm just thinking about this particular moment where there's a lot of talking, a lot of advocating. The older guard, these older women, are trying to advocate for women to get the right to vote. And their phrase is, help mother vote, because mother will vote exactly like sons and fathers, right? Like, there's a lot of conversation in that way. And then you have sort of this younger guard led by Alice Paul, who just can't stand talking anymore. And she needs to, and they finally get out and like act and do and create a lot of, chaos and tension, but they together, like, both roles, both the advocacy and the action, sort of are necessary to move that needle very slowly, but they did finally move the needle. So I think that one could say that maybe Yalta had been trying to use her words, had been trying to advocate, but there was this moment where she just couldn't handle it anymore. Actions speak louder than words sometimes, and she had to break these 400 barrels. Not only that, couldn't it be that she was making a point? What is the point of breaking 400 barrels of wine, right? She is in a way speaking directly back to Ula. Ula, you're telling me that I'm just an inconsequential vessel? Look what happens when I break all these vessels. The wine just flows onto the floor and is no longer usable. And what good is that? So you think that only the seed is relevant? No, the seed and the vessel, men and women, have to work together somehow in partnership. And so she was angry, and she deserved to be angry, and her anger was trying to make a point. And then the story continues, and she comes back to the table, and Rav Nachman says, right, no vessels to hold the wine. Exactly. Rav Nachman now looks at his guest and says, Ula, now can you please send this wine over to my wife, to Yalta? And so he does, shalachla, let's just go back and look at it. And he sends it to her, but the language here is really interesting. He sends it to her with these words. He says, kol hai navga, everything in this cup. And the word cup here is a word for like mug. It's not usually in the story, whenever the koshel yayin, this cup of wine, was referenced, it's referenced either that way or as a kasab rachta, a cup of blessing, meaning it's not just about grape juice, it's not just about a mug, but it is elevated, it has been elevated in some way, and it has kedusha, it has holiness in it because it's been blessed. It's been blessed, and it's this blessing that is sort of being passed around to others. And he essentially says, you want this cup? Fine, you can have the cup, but you're not going to be participating you're still not participating in this blessing. Don't think that you're going to have this blessing. And she sends back the strange insult of gossip comes from peddlers and vermin from rags. So let's now scroll down to source number 5 and 6. So first of all, the Maharsha, who is a commentator living in 1555, 1631, he notes, just like I did, that Yalta's anger was warranted. But why was it warranted? He says, Kasa Yalta v'tavra arba mea dene dechamra, that Yalta was angry and broke 400 jars of wine to teach that she was not angry because of the wine that was not sent to her. She wasn't thirsty. She didn't want to drink some grape juice. She didn't want that navga, that like mug. No, that wasn't important to her. Rather, she was angry because the cup of benediction was not sent to her. She wanted the cup of wine, the cup that had been blessed. She felt she had a right to participate in this ritual. And Ula was rendering her not only irrelevant, but not able to even participate and sit at the table. Now, taking the two stories together, Yalta didn't want to perform the ritual of Birkat Hamazon, of grace after meals. She wasn't trying to, usurp any authority from these male figures. She wanted to be part of it. She wanted to be a participant in it. She's not trying to break the walls of the Beit Midrash. She was in the Beit Midrash conversing with the rabbis. She wasn't trying to be an irrational shrew, so to speak. She was rationally engaging with the men in the Beit Midrash and rationally trying to get Ula to understand that women have a role to play and women should be playing a role as participants in ritual events. And so continues Gila Fine, just in source number 6. We may now understand the final line, not as a torrent of abuse, but as Yalta staking her claim to the blessing of childbirth. Gossip comes from peddlers and lice from rags. Lice, according to ancient biology, did not reproduce, but rather spontaneously generated. Take women out of the reproductive equation, says Yalta to Ula, and you might be able to reproduce lice. You might be able to generate gossip, but that's all you're going to be able to do, right? You're going to get itchy and generate a lot of this uncomfortable stuff. But you're not going to be able to do the real act of procreation because both woman and man, the vessel and the seed, are necessary. Women might be vessel, but they are no less essential to the creation of life. In fact, Yalta is not a shrew. She is trying to take her anger and productively move a needle, try to help women become participants in not only this ritual, but all ritual events. So let's transition now to think about the place of anger, right? Yalta has sort of been our model of perhaps we thought first of anger that is hurtful and destructive. But I wonder, it is true that when there are times when anger, and I'm thinking about myself in certain situations when I have been angry, it sometimes does feel destructive in that it weighs me down. I am exhausted. I want to crawl into bed. I feel stuck. I can't do anything. It's destructive in that, I'm not going anywhere. It feels heavy and exhausting. And then there are times where anger propels me forward, right? Do you ever get that bubbling up in your belly, right? Something starts deep within you and it bubbles up. You're getting angry, you're getting frustrated, but then you suddenly feel like you have to do something. You have to like jump out of your seat and like make a change, right? In the way that Yalta probably like got up from her seat in a passion and went to go make a point. So I want to think about anger, like productive anger versus destructive anger. So Judy, Yalta herself did not request the cup of benediction. Her husband asked that she be extended the courtesy of the honor. He understands the partnership of men and women. And there's a lot to say about the relationship between Nachman and Yalta. They appear in many of the stories together. It seems like they are partners. It also seems like there isn't a lot of information about their children. So many of the stories have an undertone of procreation to them, this one included, and it's not clear if they ever actually have children. And so there's definitely more to mine there about the relationship between Yalta and Nachman, but it does seem that Nachman's not such a bad guy, or like it seems that he is maybe ahead of his time trying to be a partner with his wife, with Yalta. Okay, so there are times in Tanakh, in the Torah, in our stories, where anger does not look pretty. I can think of a few. One that comes to mind is the story of Shimon and Levi, right? In the story of Dinah, when Dinah is captured, they're by the prince of Shem, and when Shimon and Levi find out about it, they get up again in a rage, and they go and devastate, eradicate, kill the people, the prince and all of these people. And we know that this rage is not condoned because, as you see in your sources, at the end of Bereshit, when Jacob is going around and blessing his children, his blessing is much more of a curse. Arur apam, right? Curse be there, meaning referencing Shimon and Levi. Anger is so fierce. Their anger was not pretty, and their wrath was so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. That does not sound like it was condoned. It sounds like it was anger that was not productive. And then we have the story of Pinchas coming up, right? That zealousness where Pinchas gets up and throws a spear between Cosby, who are apparently, having sex on a Sefer Torah. And there too, at first, we're not clear whether it's a moment of a moment of anger that's condoned or not. Now, he's given the bracha of Brit Shalom, he's giving the blessing of peace, and so either that is seen as a good thing or as a corrective to his behavior. I'm not sure, but we can think about many other moments in Tanakh where God is angry, where people are angry, and it doesn't go well. And then there's this Gemara, which I love. So we're on source number 8 for those who are following along. And we have this imagination where the rabbis are trying to decide and figure out if God prays. It's a good question, because if we know if God prays and we know what God is praying, it might help shape our experience of prayer. It might help us figure out how and what we're supposed to say. And so they're imagining, like, what might it be that God says? So Amar Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. So one rabbi says that, sorry, I just lost. Okay, so one rabbi says, may it be my will. We're trying to imagine that this is what God actually says. You hear it some Lefanei. May it be my will that my mercy will overcome my anger towards Israel for their transgressions. And may my mercy prevail over my other attributes through which Israel is punished. And may I conduct myself towards my children Israel with the attributes of mercy. And may I enter before them beyond the letter of the law. And is there, so that's the end of the prayer. Fascinating, right? Fascinating that God is praying that he can squash his anger. God is praying that mercy overrides anger, which begs the question, wait a minute, does that mean that God is angry, right? That's what the Gemara asked. if God is praying that he shouldn't be angry, Omi Ika Ritva Kamya de Kudsha Barichu, does God actually get angry? The Gemara says, yes. We know that God gets angry because it's taught in a pasuk, in a verse in Psalms, B'kol zo'am b'kol yom, that God is furious every single day. Every day God is angry. So the Gemara continues. Wait a minute. Okay, I understand that God is angry every single day, but what does that mean? V'kama za'amo. What does it mean that God's angry every day? Like, I need more words about that. The Gemara is saying, I need to understand that a little deeper. What does it mean? Like, how long is every day? For how long does he get angry every day? And so the Gemara answers, he gets angry for rega, just a moment, right? The Gemara doesn't actually know how to translate the word rega. So it says, okay, I understand. God gets angry for a moment, for a rega, but how long is that? Like, how long is a rega? Like, they really want to understand this crazy concept of God getting angry. A rega is 158,888th of an hour. I actually have no idea how long that is. I never did the calculation, but it's a split second, just a little bit of time. That's how long God gets angry for. And generally, no person can figure out exactly what that moment is, except for Bilam, the wicked, about whom it is written, he knows the knowledge of the Most High. I'll just explain what that means, and then we'll go back to this concept of anger. You see, Bilam is an evil prophet, and he had this ability, this unique ability to like assess and know exactly when God was angry. And that was very useful for him, because when God was angry, it meant that God's value of rachamim, his guard of rachamim, of mercy, wasn't available. And Bilam then would be able to curse the Jewish people. So if Bilam knew when God was angry, instead of blessing the Jewish people, he would be able to pick that exact moment where God was angry and then curse the Jewish people. Now, of course, what the Gemara goes on to say is that the miracle of the Bilam story is that God was able to tamp down his anger, even for a rega, even for a moment, so that Bilam would bless the Jewish people and not curse the Jewish people. Okay, so I feel this Gemara is profoundly, exciting, animates me, because what a relief, a breath of fresh air to know that I'm not alone in my anger. I'm not the only one who gets angry. God gets angry. Not only does God get angry, God gets angry every day. But here's the thing. God's anger has to be mitigated. It can't just be angry all the time at every moment. God channels God's anger into a rega, into a minute. So anger is good. Anger is okay. But having anger that is destructive, that destroys, is not going to be productive. It's not going to be useful. But if you somehow, like God, if we somehow can channel that anger into a rega, into a moment, into a minute, into something that's productive, then who knows what we can do, right? If Yalta's anger may seem at first blush like it was destructive, but actually her point was productive. She was trying to achieve a goal. Anger is necessary and relevant sometimes when you're trying to make a big change. And I think about myself, if I didn't have that like bubbling over of frustration and anger as I was going through my own journey of becoming a rabbi, I think I might still be sitting and waiting. I still might be sitting and waiting for male institutions to open their doors to women to become rabbis. I still might be waiting, and the 75 women who are out in the field now serving as female Orthodox rabbis, I don't know what they would be doing. But anger, sometimes it does lead to change, but it has to be purposeful. It has to be directed. And the idea and the concept that women are criticized or seen as shrews for being angry is not fair, right? Anger helps. Anger gets stuff done. But it has to be anger that is productive and mitigated and contained in just a rega, in just a moment. So let me pause there and take thoughts, feedback.
Thank you so much, Rabba Sara. I just want to thank you for your presentation and echo what you said. If anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to raise hands, or you can also write things in the chat. Hey, Glea.
Hey, all right. So I've got 5 Zyrtec pills in me right now. So anyway, though, just so you know, I'm gonna sound crazy, but well, one of the things I said that I want to be like Yalta when I grow up, though, because Yalta doesn't care. Like anger, like women tend to like feel like horrible when we get angry and everything, and Yalta just seems like she doesn't exactly care, you know. So that's one of the things that's interesting. But it's like every story, Yalta story, she doesn't seem like she actually like cares what they think of her and everything. But another thing, though, is I'm kind of wondering where the director, the where the anger is actually, you know, coming from. It's not just where it's being directed, though, but also like what is the source of the anger. If you're getting angry because there's a personal insult and everything, that's a little different from, you know, anger because there is an injustice being done and you actually feel something because of that injustice. So I don't know if you want to speak to that necessarily, though, but yeah, she wasn't doing it, I don't think, because she was personally insulted. It was women were insulted. And so I think that that's, if it had been just her, I kind of think that she would have handled it very differently.
I think you're right. I think that at first blush, it does seem like a personal affront, and that, you know, it's one guest being rude to one host, and it's entirely personal. But it does seem, as we pick apart the story a little bit, that Yeltsin's trying to create change. He's trying to advocate not only for himself, but as the Maharsha says, to participate in a ritual not only for herself, but for all women, for everybody. And so, you know, I too want to be Yalta when I grow up, right? I encountered Yalta when I was at the beginning of my journey towards learning to become a rabbi. And I felt like I had met a long lost friend, like somebody who was like born in the wrong century and who I could really understand as wanting to move a movement and not just wait and let things happen around her. And so in that way, I think she was trying to her anger was like directed at a concept, at a thing, and not only at a person. I think Ula was representative of a philosophy, not, you know, of a philosophy that she was trying to poke holes in.
But wasn't she also angry because Ula had additionally insulted her husband, who was a learned man? Ula is not a rabbi, according to the text. And there he is lecturing Rav Nachman on text. And it's kind of obnoxious additionally. So not only is he insulting the wife, he's insulting the husband, and he's disrespecting the household.
So it's so, first of all, we don't know if Ula was a rabbi or not, because in Palestine, like not like think about Hillel and Shammai, right? Not everybody at the beginning, not all scholars had the nomenclature of rabbi or rav, but I'm not sure about that. But I think what's really interesting, Judy, is that Rav Nachman is somewhat silent, right? He doesn't defend Yalta. He doesn't react or respond either to Ula, and he also doesn't do anything. I mean, he does get Ula to send the cup over again at the end, but he's, you know, to me, he feels like the foil to Yalta. And what I mean by that is, like, where's his anger? Like, why isn't he more angry? Like, I almost want to poke him and say, like, get up there and break some barrels with your wife. This is upsetting. And it is true that Ula insults him, but he seems to be very passive about it.
Well, he's got a problem though, doesn't he? Because he's required not to humiliate anybody. That's a mitzvah not to do that. And yet someone has insulted him. So what does he do? Does he insult him back? Or does he just say to him again, yeah, now it's time to pass that to my wife?
I think that's the difference between personal insult and insult on behalf of all women, though, because it's a personal insult in, you know, to Rav Nachman, but it's a thing for, you know, like it's speaking to all women when he's doing it to Yalta. So I don't know, like, if anybody else sees it that way, but that's kind of how I saw it. And also, like, I think that he knows that Yalta's got it covered. She doesn't need a man to like protect her. Unlike certain celebrities I know, no, my husband's not protecting me. She's got this, covered. So
Yeah, I always feel a little disappointed in Rav Nachman. I want him to be a stronger character, but he can't be, because otherwise we wouldn't see and appreciate Yalta's strength. And I think that the Gemara is less interested in him, right? Like we don't hear his story as much as hers, and so it's less interesting to us for us to understand, how he feels about Ula's insult to him, because I think what is being drawn out from the story for us is really the role that Yalta plays, and I just see him as a foil to her.
But he also doesn't speak for her. He lets her speak for herself.
Totally, which is why I think the story is really for her. I mean, you could ask the same question in the other story that we read, right? Like, if Rav Nachman's a rabbi, why couldn't she just have gone to him and ask him her questions? And I think, again, it's purposeful that she didn't. He understood that she needed to have autonomy on this topic, and that she needed to step outside of the home to get the answer that she desired. And so he was silent. He was silent because she needed to rise. She needed to be the main player in the story.
Rabba Sara, thank you so much for joining us today and for leading us. It was a pleasure to learn with you. I just want to let everyone know about our next class, which will be on July 25th with Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe on Serach Bat Asher, the most underrated woman in the Tanakh. So hopefully you can all tune into that one as well. And thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Everybody, thank you for learning with me.